This episode of Advancing Hope in Childhood Cancer continues our discussion from Part 1, Understanding Neuroblastoma and the Care Journey. If you haven't seen it yet, watch Part 1 on our YouTube channel.
Can we discuss some of the challenges in designing trials for children?
Yes. Designing trials for children is very different than designing trials in adults. The standard best in science are single drug trials and often randomized trials. So we're going to test this one drug in this patient population compared to a placebo. These trials need a lot of statistical power, so often thousands of patients. And in adults, where there are tens of thousands of patients for each disease, it's possible to do those trials in a short amount of time and get good scientific answers. In children, pediatric cancers are rare diseases. For high-risk neuroblastoma, about 700 children in the US, but 400 will have high risk. And that's across the whole US. So to do a randomized clinical trial often takes over 10 years in pediatric cancers. And that really slows the pace of any advancements happening. Also, it's been shown in trials, a single drug being tested will have a 10% response rate in a relapsed refractory patient, which is where you usually have to start in a clinical trial. So that brings a lot of struggles for us. We don't believe that children should be getting placebo. If a child has cancer, they need treatment. And also a single drug trial is best in science, but not best for children. So we want to design our clinical trials in ways that we can test medications by adding them to a standard of care. Combinations trials have been shown to have much greater efficacy, more responses, closer to the 30 to 50% of children responding versus the 10%. So we need to design our clinical trials in ways that we can combine with standard of care and have other ways to compare the outcomes to, and not necessarily looking at placebo-controlled trials.
So with the idea to advance clinical trials for children, why don't we jump to talking about Beat Childhood Cancer Consortium? Tell me about the origin and the mission and where you're hoping to go with it.
Sure. The Beat Childhood Cancer Research Consortium is a collaborative team of physicians, researchers, parent advocates, pharma. We came together in 2009 to bring novel therapies, early phase trials, precision medicine to children with cancer across the US. Initially, we were only 5 hospitals, but we really wanted to give access in different parts of the US to medications, so families didn't necessarily have to travel to a center to get the care. Over the past 15 years, we've grown to over 50 hospitals throughout the US and Canada. This year, we are expanding further to the European site in Barcelona, Spain, and a South American site in São Paulo, Brazil. With more sites participating in our trials, we can reach more children at home so they don't have to leave their support system, their families. And in doing so, having a greater number of sites, we can also enroll children more quickly, finish trials more quickly to achieve those answers and drug approvals. Speed is what's needed for children diagnosed today.
That's fantastic. I love how much it's growing.
Yeah. And just another, aspect of the consortium that I think is really important, that it is a collaboration between parents, advocates, physicians, researchers, also pharma, the FDA, everyone coming together, bringing their heart and their part to the consortium allows us to get things done more quickly. Historically, in trying to bring a clinical trial and then trying to apply for grant funding, wait for grant funding, it can be over 2 years before that funding happens. With our parents and advocates at the table with us, as we discuss the science, their understanding of the need for children today, we can usually have a trial concept to opening within 9 months to a year. And that collaboration and working together is really what makes that happen.
What role do parents and caregivers play at that table?
So the role of the parents and advocates in the Beat Childhood Cancer Consortium really brings the input from the parent side, the child side, in terms of, as we design our clinical trial, is this something that is feasible, what we're asking of parents and families to do on the trial? The number of visits, the number of blood draws, et cetera, can help us to design studies that are best for children. In addition, they're able to do the fundraising and the advocacy work to bring the funding so that we can not have to wait for grant funding, for 2 years. The funding is there and the trial can be open immediately. It's really an important collaboration. They're also advocates, making other families aware of these studies. So if a child is diagnosed in another country, they have a very big social media presence that can help make families aware that they do have options, they do have hope, and helping to connect them.
Oh, that's fantastic. Giving hope and optimism to families for sure. Let's talk about the importance of phase 1 and 2 trials and how they differ for children.
Sure. So a phase 1 study is the first time that we're going to treat a child with this medication. And so the primary aim of a phase 1 is always safety and identifying the right dose for that child. So while the research may have been done in the laboratories showing great promise for a particular medication, first thing that needs to be done is identifying how to use this in our children with cancer. And children with cancer, our phase 1 trials often follow an adult phase 1. So we will start at 75% of what the phase 1 dose was in the adults. Our goal is to start with a dose that will be therapeutic, but really the primary aim of a phase 1 is safety. Is this, and identifying what is the toxicity profile? Does this medication cause nausea? Does the medication cause liver toxicity? What are the side effects of the medication, and what is the right dose? So we'll start with a lower dose and increase in doses until we identify what is the most effective dose that is tolerable. Then we can move to a phase 2. A phase 2 are powered to look for efficacy. Does this dose enough patients using this medication? Is this medication effective in this particular cancer?
Okay. So some of the challenges that are faced in neuroblastoma trials are also seen in other rare pediatric cancers like sarcomas. Mm-hmm. Can you briefly speak to any similarities or shared strategies across trials for these rare cancers?
Yes. Yeah. All pediatric cancers are rare, but we have some pediatric cancers that are rare, like neuroblastoma, sarcomas, and some brain tumors like DIPG, medulloblastoma, that we are studying all of these in the Beat Childhood Cancer Consortium because these are the childhood cancers that need answers now. We are not doing well enough. We should be in sarcomas, and some sarcomas like Ewing's, we haven't improved outcomes in 15 years. And so there are similarities in terms of pathways. And so we're really trying to sequence every one of these patients to look what pathways are driving that cancer. And now that many of the newer medications are targeted, such as an mTOR inhibitor or particular inhibitors of particular pathways, so that we can treat children based on their genomics and their pathways that are active in their cancer, not the name of the cancer, because they do, there are pathways that are across all cancers. And so understanding each child, finding the medications that's right for that child, we can do in all of those. And so many of our newer studies are really focused on pathways and include all solid tumors. For instance, we have a clinical trial right now with a CK2 inhibitor that we initially studied in neuroblastoma, but then in looking at the sarcomas, this pathway is actually even more important in the sarcomas. So our trial involves all children.
With regards to DFMO, targeted therapy for neuroblastoma, and orphan drug and breakthrough therapy designation, what does this mean for access and progress?
Yeah, those programs are really critical for all pediatric cancer programs because often we're using medications that have already been approved for another indication. And so to engage pharma to help us move this through FDA approval as a sponsor and to make this medication available for children across the country. Pediatric cancer, as I mentioned earlier, is such a rare disease. So for instance, neuroblastoma in high-risk patients, there'll be maybe 400 children. So to make it a business case for the pharmaceutical companies, we need programs like orphan drug designation and breakthrough therapy designation, because otherwise they would really honestly be losing money on trying to help children with cancer. The orphan drug designation gives so orphan diseases or rare diseases are those in which there's less than 200,000 people in the US. Clearly, all pediatric cancers are orphan diseases. But by receiving orphan drug designation, it gives the company 7 years of market exclusivity, as well as an exemption from the FDA application fees, which can be over $3 million. And again, if you're treating only 400 kids a year, that amount of money just doesn't equate as a business case for the pharmaceutical company. It also makes us as researchers eligible for orphan designation grants. So all of these things are kind of the government way of helping us to bring things forward in pediatric cancer in a rational way. The breakthrough therapy designation was also important for us as we studied DFMO in neuroblastoma. Breakthrough therapy designation are for drugs that show substantial improvement over existing therapies, which we were able to show in our phase 2. Then it allows researchers and pharmaceutical companies to have very frequent meetings and advice and alignment with the FDA as you're moving through the approval process, and also allows for the potential of it, both accelerated approval and priority review, which can save months of time. So both of these are really critical programs for childhood cancer.
I'm just curious, have you seen any situations where there's been success with adults that can be applied to children's cancers?
So we do learn a lot from the adult trials. We definitely follow the adult trials because they're using many of the same medications in terms of the targeted medications that we would like to use in pediatric oncology. And so, for instance, with neuroblastoma, one of the mutations that occurs is an ALK mutation where the adult studies were able to move the ALK inhibitor forward and receive FDA approval for the ALK inhibitor in adults. That allows us now to prescribe it off-label for our children with high-risk neuroblastoma, of which only about less than 10% have that ALK mutation. So it's a very rare and would be challenging for us to go through a whole approval process. But because of the adults were able to achieve approval, and because of the research done in pediatric cancer showing the same mutations are present in our cancers, we are able to off-labelly prescribe the medication and get access to our children.
Okay. What excites you most about the direction that pediatric oncology research is heading in?
And one of the really exciting things is the sequencing of all children. I think that has become, while about 10 years ago, we were just starting to do genomic sequencing on patients' cancers to understand it. Now, our center and many centers across the U.S., it is standard when a child is diagnosed, when a child is relapsed, to have whole exome sequencing, looking at 25,000 genes in the DNA, understanding why this child has cancer, what has mutated, what are the drivers, and then also translating the RNA, sequencing 25,000 genes, the RNA, to look at what are the pathways driving the cancers. Is the mutation, did that mutation in the DNA turn that pathway on, and the downstream RNA pathway is on, and potentially it's something we can target? Is really exciting. Better understanding every child's cancer is happening across the country, across the world. And now one of the big initiatives is data sharing. If we can share those sequences across different institutions, different platforms, we can learn more, better understand, do more research, and find answers today. Through all of that sequencing, we are looking at more targeted therapies, and we're moving away from the old toxic therapies that we've been using for 50 years, the kids that leave them with long-term side effects and toxicities. And when we say long-term side effects, that's 20 years later. So if we are treating a child with 5 years old, they're only 25 and their hearts are failing or their lungs are becoming fibrotic, and they're still kids. It's still too soon. And so we really need to move away from those old toxic therapies so our children can not only survive their cancer, but thrive into later adulthood. And so really finding new targeted therapies that affect the cancer, but not the whole child. And really treating the disease based on the mutation. Another really exciting area is the immunotherapy, and it goes along in the same way in that we're using the immune system to fight cancer in targeted ways, whether it's through an antibody therapy, the antibody binding to the cancer and attracting the immune system to clear it, or through identification of neoantigen mutations, so we can create personalized RNA vaccines, so that the patient training the immune system to fight their cancer, or through the activated CAR T cells or NK cells. There are another way as we activate the later part of the immune system that can then be reinfused into the patient to go directly to the cancer and kill it. There's so many more targeted ways to treat cancers today that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, it is very exciting for sure. Are you seeing anything that's benefiting specifically neuroblastoma or any other rare tumors like pediatric sarcomas?
Um, yes, in both in neuroblastoma and then sarcomas, there are antibody therapies that are being treated to really target that cancer. We are definitely learning more about the pathways that drive the cancers, so we can use more targeted therapies, such as the ALK inhibitor in neuroblastoma. There's so much happening in this area right now. It's very exciting.
Mm. So, biomarkers are becoming increasingly important in tailoring cancer treatments. What role do they play in neuroblastoma research, and how might they influence future treatment strategies?
Um, One of the areas is like a biomarker that we are starting to do right now are liquid biopsies. And that's really grown over even just the last year, where we really weren't doing it as consistently. But now we're really able to look at the circulating tumor DNA, looking again at whole exome, whole transcriptome in the blood of a patient. So a liquid biopsy, and our program here is doing that about every 3 months. We can see the mutations that are in the cancer in the blood. We can see as children are going into remission, we can detect early relapses using this, and we can detect the changes that are happening. So sometimes we'll see a percentage of a mutation at one time point, and then 2 time points later, we can see emergence of a new mutation. So then we can target that at that time without having to do a biopsy or a large procedure, just by following the blood samples.